The abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Detroit echoed with desperate sobs. Inside, 22-year-old Sarah Mitchell clutched her 3-month-old daughter Emma against her chest, knowing this might be their final moments together. 3 armed men stood before them, their faces hidden behind masks, demanding something Sarah couldn't possibly give. But what happened next would change 2 lives forever, and prove that sometimes the greatest act of love comes from a complete stranger. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The story begins 6 months earlier in the small town of Millbrook, Michigan, where Sarah Mitchell worked double shifts at Hanson's Diner to support her newborn daughter. The autumn leaves painted the quiet streets in shades of gold and crimson. But Sarah barely noticed the beauty around her. Every day was a battle for survival, juggling motherhood with the crushing weight of financial desperation. Sarah had moved to Millbrook after her boyfriend Marcus abandoned her during pregnancy, leaving behind nothing but empty promises and unpaid bills. Her parents, strict religious folks from Alabama, had disowned her when she refused to give up the baby for adoption. With no family support and limited education, Sarah found herself completely alone in a world that seemed determined to break. Her spirit. Emma was born on a cold February morning at Millbrook General Hospital. The moment Sarah held her daughter for the first time, everything else faded away. Emma's tiny fingers wrapped around Sarah's thumb with surprising strength, and her bright blue eyes seemed to hold infinite wisdom. Sarah whispered promises to her daughter that night, promises she desperately hoped she could keep. The diner job barely covered their tiny apartment rent on Maple Street. Sarah would carry Emma in a worn baby carrier while walking to work, the Michigan winter biting through their thin coats. Mrs. Hanson, the diner's elderly owner, took pity on Sarah and allowed her to keep Emma in a makeshift crib behind the counter. During her shifts, customers would often coo at the baby while ordering their coffee and pie, and Sarah would smile gratefully, though worry lines had already begun forming around her young eyes. By summer, things seemed to be improving slightly. Emma was growing into a happy, curious baby who giggled at the ceiling fan in their apartment and reached for the colorful mobile Sarah had bought at a thrift store. Sarah had even managed to save a small emergency fund, barely $300. But it felt like a fortune to her. Everything changed on a humid August evening when Sarah was walking home from her evening shift. 3 men approached her near the abandoned Millbrook steel plant, their intentions immediately clear. Sarah clutched Emma tighter and tried to run, but they cornered her against a chain-link fence. "We know you got money," the tallest one said, his voice muffled by a bandana. "We seen you at the bank." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. She thought of the envelope hidden under her mattress, her entire life savings. "Please," she whispered, "I have a baby. I don't have anything valuable." But they had been watching her. They knew about her routine, her work schedule, even where she lived. The revelation sent ice through Sarah's veins. This wasn't random. They had been planning this. "You got 3 days," the second man growled. $5,000 or we take something else." $5,000 might as well have been $5 million to Sarah. She worked minimum wage and could barely afford formula and diapers. The men disappeared into the night, leaving Sarah trembling on the empty street with Emma crying in her arms. Sarah spent the next 2 days in a panic. She called everyone she could think of, former co-workers from Alabama, distant relatives, even Marcus's mother, who had always been kind to her. But nobody had that kind of money to spare, and many didn't even return her calls. The small-town banks wouldn't give her a loan without collateral she didn't possess. On the morning of the 3rd day, Sarah made a decision that would haunt her forever. She had noticed flyers around town offering quick cash for personal services. Flyers that led to a shadowy network of people involved in activities she didn't want to think about too deeply. But with Emma's life potentially at stake, Sarah felt she had no choice. She contacted a number on one of the flyers and was told to meet someone at the old industrial district after dark. The voice on the phone was smooth, professional even, but something about it made Sarah's skin crawl. Still, she agreed. What else could she do? That evening, Sarah left Emma with Mrs. Hanson, claiming she had a family emergency. The elderly woman's concerned questions almost broke Sarah's resolve, but the memory of those threatening voices pushed her forward. She drove her rusty Honda Civic to the meeting spot, her hands shaking on the steering wheel. The industrial district was a graveyard of American manufacturing, empty factories and warehouses stretching for blocks, their windows dark and broken. Sarah found the specified building and parked outside, her courage nearly failing her completely. She sat in the car for 10 minutes, watching the shadows move across the cracked pavement, before finally stepping out into the night. Inside the warehouse, things went wrong immediately. The man who met her, a thin, nervous type named Eddie Kowalski, wasn't interested in the kind of work Sarah had reluctantly prepared herself for. Instead, he needed someone to make a delivery, something he claimed was completely safe, but paid unusually well. Sarah's instincts screamed at her to leave, but Eddie showed her the money, 5 crisp $1,000 bills that would solve her immediate problem and maybe give Emma a better start in life. Against her better judgment, Sarah agreed to make the delivery. The package was small, wrapped in brown paper, and Eddie made her promise not to look inside. She was to take it to an address on the east side of Detroit and hand it directly to someone named Vincent Torelli. Eddie gave her detailed instructions about the route to take and specific times when she should arrive. Sarah drove through the night toward Detroit, Emma sleeping peacefully in her car seat, completely unaware that her mother was making choices that would endanger them both. The city lights grew brighter as they approached, and Sarah felt a growing sense of dread. This wasn't just about making money anymore. She was in over her head, carrying something that clearly wasn't legal. The address turned out to be a nightclub called the Phoenix, its neon sign flickering against the dark sky. Sarah parked across the street and watched the entrance for nearly an hour, seeing tough-looking men in expensive suits coming and going. Her hands were sweating as she finally worked up the courage to approach. Inside, the music was deafeningly loud and the air thick with cigarette smoke. Sarah, holding Emma close, felt completely out of place among the well-dressed patrons and scantily clad waitresses. She asked for Vincent Torelli and was directed to a back room where a heavy-set man in a pinstripe suit sat behind an enormous desk. Vincent Torelli looked at Sarah with calculating eyes, taking in her cheap clothes and obvious nervousness. When she handed him the package, he opened it immediately, revealing what appeared to be documents of some kind. His expression darkened as he read through them. "Eddie didn't tell you what this was, did he?" Vincent asked, his voice carrying a threat that made Sarah step backward. Sarah shook her head, clutching Emma tighter. The baby was starting to fuss, sensing her mother's fear. "These are police reports," Vincent continued, his eyes never leaving Sarah's face. "About my business operations. Someone's been feeding information to the cops, and Eddie thought he could use you as his messenger girl." The realization hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had been set up. Eddie had used her as a courier to deliver evidence that could put Vincent Torelli in prison, and now she was standing in front of a very angry man who clearly had no qualms about violence. "Please," Sarah whispered, backing toward the door. "I didn't know. I just needed the money. I have a baby to feed." But Vincent's men had already moved to block her exit. Sarah found herself trapped in the back room of a Detroit nightclub, holding her infant daughter and facing consequences she never could have imagined when she first answered that phone number. Vincent studied Sarah for a long moment, seemingly weighing his options. Emma chose that moment to cry, her small voice cutting through the tension in the room. Something shifted in Vincent's expression as he looked at the baby. "How old?" he asked quietly. 3 months, Sarah replied, her voice barely audible. Vincent nodded slowly. My daughter would have been about that age, he said, more to himself than to Sarah. If she had lived. Sarah didn't dare respond, but something in Vincent's tone gave her the faintest glimmer of hope. The dangerous man behind the desk was showing. A crack in his armor, revealing a grief that matched the desperation she felt every day. Eddie Kowalski has put me in a very difficult position, Vincent said finally. These documents could destroy everything I've built. And you, Miss Mitchell. Yes, I know who you are. You're the only person who can connect Eddie to this delivery. Sarah's blood ran cold. She understood what he was implying. But I also see a young mother who got taken advantage of by a coward, Vincent continued. So I'm going to give you a choice. Vincent Torelli's choice was as cruel as it was simple. Sarah could disappear forever, ensuring she'd never testify against his operations. Or she could watch her daughter grow up from behind prison bars after he framed her for drug trafficking. The documents Eddie had sent weren't just police reports. They were Vincent's insurance policy, containing detailed records of his money laundering network that he'd prepared to pin on someone expendable if needed. Your fingerprints are all over that package, Vincent explained, his voice eerily calm. Eddie made sure of that. He's been planning to throw you under the bus from the beginning. Sarah felt her legs give out, and she sank into the leather chair across from Vincent's desk. Emma stirred in her arms, making soft cooing sounds that seemed impossibly innocent in this nightmare scenario. The baby's tiny fingers grasped at Sarah's shirt, seeking comfort that her mother couldn't provide. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. There has to be another way, Sarah pleaded, her voice cracking. I'll disappear. I'll move across the country. I'll never speak to anyone about what I saw here. Vincent shook his head slowly. Too risky. Eddie knows where you live, what you look like, everything about you. If the police ever connect him to those documents, he'll give them your name in a heartbeat to save his own skin. The weight of her situation crushed down on Sarah. She had walked into this warehouse thinking she was solving her problems, but instead she'd stumbled into a web that would destroy everything she'd fought to build for Emma. The irony was bitter. In trying to save her daughter, she had doomed them both. However, Vincent continued, leaning back in his chair, I might have a third option. Sarah looked up sharply, hope flickering in her chest despite everything. I have associates who specialize in making people disappear permanently, Vincent said, not killing them, relocating them so completely that they cease to exist in their old lives. New identities, new backgrounds, new everything. The offer hung in the air between them like a lifeline made of razor wire. Sarah knew there would be strings attached. There always were with men like Vincent Torelli. What would you want in return? She asked quietly. Vincent's expression grew distant, his eyes focusing on something beyond the smoke-filled room. I told you my daughter would have been Emma's age. What I didn't tell you is that she died because of my choices. Because of the life I chose to live. He stood and walked to a window overlooking the city lights. Maria, that was my wife's name. She was 8 months pregnant when rival family decided to send me a message. They planted a bomb in her car. She lived long enough to deliver our daughter, but little Anna only survived 3 days. Sarah felt her anger toward Vincent soften slightly, replaced by a mother's understanding of unimaginable loss. She couldn't fathom surviving what he'd described. That was 5 years ago, Vincent continued. Since then, I've been building something different. Still illegal, still dangerous, but focused on protecting families rather than destroying them. I run safe houses for women escaping abusive situations, provide new identities for people who need to disappear from dangerous lives. He turned back to face Sarah, and she saw something unexpected in his eyes, genuine grief mixed with a strange kind of hope. But here's what I need from you, Vincent said, his voice growing firm again. Your daughter. Not permanently, but for long enough that everyone believes both of you are gone. I'll take Emma somewhere safe while you disappear completely. After a few years, when the heat dies down and Eddie's either in prison or dead, you can reclaim her. Sarah's blood turned to ice. No, absolutely not. I won't be separated from my daughter. Then you'll both end up dead or in prison, Vincent replied bluntly. Those are your only other options. The room fell silent except for Emma's gentle breathing. Sarah looked down at her daughter's peaceful face, trying to imagine years without seeing those bright blue eyes or hearing that infectious giggle. The thought physically hurt, like someone was tearing her heart from her chest. How do I know you won't just sell her? Sarah whispered. How do I know she'd be safe? Vincent walked to his desk and pulled out a photograph. It showed a beautiful woman with long dark hair holding a tiny baby wrapped in a pink blanket. The woman was smiling, but Vincent's expression in the photo was one of pure joy and wonder. Because I failed to protect my own daughter, he said quietly, and I won't fail to protect yours. Sarah stared at the photograph, seeing the pain Vincent carried every day. She understood now why he'd offered this impossible choice. It wasn't just about eliminating a witness. It was about redemption, about saving a child when he couldn't save his own. Where would she go? Sarah asked, hating herself for even considering it. I have a contact in Portland, Oregon, Dr. James Harrison. He's a pediatrician who lost his wife to cancer 2 years ago. They couldn't have children of their own, and he's been part of my network for years, helping kids who need medical care. Off the books. Vincent slid a folder across the desk toward Sarah. Inside were documents, photographs, and what appeared to be a detailed background report on Dr. Harrison. The man was 43, worked at Portland Children's Hospital, and had an impeccable record both professionally and personally. He's been asking for a chance to adopt, Vincent explained. Not through official channels. Those take too long and ask too many questions. But through our network. He wants to be a father, and he has the resources to give Emma everything she'd need. Sarah flipped through the documents with trembling hands. Dr. Harrison's house was beautiful. A large colonial in a safe neighborhood with excellent schools nearby. His financial records showed he could easily afford Emma's care, education, and anything else she might need. On paper, it looked like a dream life for her daughter. He doesn't know about Emma yet, Vincent continued. This would all depend on your decision tonight. Tonight? Sarah's voice rose in panic. You want me to decide right now? Eddie's already suspicious about why you haven't returned, Vincent said, glancing at his watch. My sources tell me he's planning to disappear himself within the next 24 hours. If we're going to do this, it has to be now. Sarah felt trapped between impossible choices. Stay with Emma and watch them both destroy each other through poverty and desperation, or trust a criminal's promise that separating would somehow save them both. Emma chose that moment to wake up, her small face scrunching as she prepared to cry. Sarah quickly adjusted her position, and the baby settled back into sleep with a contented sigh. The simple interaction reminded Sarah of all the small moments she'd miss. The first steps, first words, first day of school. What about me? Sarah asked. Where would I go? Wherever you want, Vincent replied. New identity, enough money to start over completely. You could go to college, build a career, become the person you want to be instead of just surviving day by day. The offer was tempting in ways Sarah didn't want to admit. Since Emma's birth, she'd felt like she was drowning, barely keeping her head above water while trying to provide for her daughter. The chance to build something better, to become someone who could eventually offer Emma a real future, was seductive. How long? Sarah whispered. How long would we be apart? 3 years, maybe 4. Long enough for the heat to die down and for you to establish your new life. Then we arrange a reunion. Maybe you're Dr. Harrison's new girlfriend who moves in and eventually marries him. Emma gets both her real mother and an adoptive father who can provide stability. Vincent made it sound so simple, but Sarah knew nothing about this life was ever simple. There would be complications, unexpected problems, and no guarantee that any of it would work the way he described. What if Dr. Harrison doesn't want to give her back? Sarah asked. Then you'll have legal documents proving you're her biological mother and enough money to fight for custody, Vincent replied. Plus, James Harrison is a good man. He'd want what's best for Emma, and that's having her real mother in her life. Sarah looked down at Emma again, memorizing every detail of her daughter's face. The baby's eyelashes cast tiny shadows on her cheeks, and her small mouth was curved in what looked like a smile. Sarah wondered if Emma would remember her at all. After 3 or 4 years apart, I need guarantees, Sarah said finally. I need to know exactly how this would work, how you'd keep Emma safe, how I'd know she was okay. Vincent nodded as if he'd expected this response. Fair enough. Here's what I can offer you. He outlined an elaborate plan that had clearly been forming in his mind since the moment Sarah walked into his office. Emma would be taken to Portland within 24 hours, delivered directly to Dr. Harrison, along with a fabricated story about being the orphan daughter of one of Vincent's deceased associates. Medical records would be provided showing Emma was healthy and up to date on all vaccinations. Dr. Harrison would be told that Emma's mother had died in a car accident and that her dying wish was for her daughter to be raised by someone who could provide the love and stability she couldn't. The story was close enough to the truth that Vincent's people could make it convincing. Meanwhile, Sarah would be transported to Vancouver, Canada, where she'd receive a complete new identity as Rebecca Walsh, a 23-year-old college graduate from Nova Scotia. She'd have enough money to enroll in university and study whatever she wanted while building her new life. Every 6 months, you'll receive a packet of photographs and updates about Emma, Vincent promised. Nothing that could be traced back to you, but enough that you'll know she's safe and happy. Sarah's head was spinning from the complexity of it all. Part of her wondered if Vincent was making this elaborate offer because he genuinely wanted to help, or if he was just an expert manipulator who knew exactly what to say to get what he wanted. Why should I trust you? She asked bluntly. You're a criminal. You've built your life on lying and breaking the law. Vincent's smile was grim, but somehow genuine. Because, Miss Mitchell, I'm the only person in this room who has absolutely nothing to gain from lying to you. If I wanted you dead, you'd already be dead. If I wanted to steal your daughter, I'd have already taken her. What I want is to save 2 lives that got caught up in a situation they never should have been in. Sarah realized he was right. Vincent held all the cards. He could have eliminated her as a witness without offering any alternatives. The fact that he was going to such elaborate lengths to help her suggested his motivations were more complex than simple self-interest. I want to see Dr. Harrison first, Sarah said suddenly. Before I agree to anything, I want to meet the man who would raise my daughter. Vincent raised an eyebrow. That's not how this usually works. Then this won't work at all, Sarah replied. Firmly, I won't hand Emma over to a stranger without looking him in the eye first. For a long moment, Vincent studied Sarah's face. She met his gaze steadily, her maternal instincts finally overriding her fear. Emma might have to grow up without her for a while, but Sarah would make damn sure it was with someone worthy of her daughter's trust. All right, Vincent said finally. I'll make some calls. We can have Dr. Harrison here by tomorrow evening. But understand, once you meet him, you have to make your decision immediately. We can't keep dragging this out. Sarah nodded, knowing she was sealing her fate with that simple gesture. Tomorrow evening, she would have to choose between keeping Emma and potentially destroying both their lives, or trusting a stranger to raise the most important person in her world. Dr. James Harrison arrived at Vincent's warehouse the following evening looking nothing like Sarah had expected. Instead of the polished professional she'd imagined, he appeared tired and rumpled, his dark hair disheveled from the emergency flight from Portland. His clothes were casual, jeans and a wrinkled button-down shirt, and his eyes held the same haunted quality Sarah recognized in her own mirror. Vincent had arranged for them to meet in a different location, a small office above an Italian restaurant in Detroit's Little Italy neighborhood. The smell of garlic and fresh bread drifted up through the floorboards, creating an oddly domestic atmosphere for such an extraordinary conversation. Sarah sat in a corner chair, Emma sleeping peacefully in her carrier beside her. She had barely slept the previous night, alternating between rehearsing questions for Dr. Harrison and imagining what life might look like if she went through with Vincent's plan. "Dr. Harrison," Vincent said by way of introduction, "this is Sarah Mitchell and her daughter Emma." James Harrison's gaze immediately went to the baby, and Sarah watched his expression transform completely. The exhaustion melted away, replaced by something that looked like wonder. He took a hesitant step closer, then stopped himself. "She's beautiful," he said softly, his voice carrying genuine emotion. "How old is she now?" 3 months and 2 weeks, Sarah replied, studying every nuance of his reaction. James nodded, then looked directly at Sarah. "Vincent explained the situation, but I'd like to hear it from you. This is your choice, and I need to understand what you're thinking." Sarah had prepared for this moment, but facing the man who might raise her daughter made everything suddenly real in a way that Vincent's abstract planning hadn't. She found herself scrutinizing James Harrison's every gesture, looking for signs of character that would determine Emma's future. "I made some terrible mistakes trying to provide for Emma," Sarah began carefully. "Now we're both in danger, and the only way to protect her is to make sure she's somewhere safe while I disappear completely." "But you'd want her back eventually," James said. "It wasn't a question." "Yes," Sarah replied firmly. "This would be temporary, a few years at most." James was quiet for a long moment, his eyes moving between Sarah and Emma. "I lost my wife 2 years ago to cancer," he said finally. "We tried for children for 8 years before that, but it never happened. After Catherine died, I thought my chance at being a father was gone forever." He paused, running his hand through his hair. "Vincent's offer feels like a miracle, but I need you to understand something. If I take Emma, I'm going to love her as if she were my own daughter. I'll read her bedtime stories, teach her to ride a bike, and be there for her first day of school. When you come back, it's going to be complicated." Sarah appreciated his honesty more than she could express. Too many people would have made empty promises about how easy the transition would be. "Tell me about your life," Sarah said. "What would Emma's daily routine look like?" James's face lit up as he described his home in Portland's Laurelhurst neighborhood. His house had 4 bedrooms, including one he'd already mentally converted into a nursery. The backyard featured a large maple tree perfect for a swing set, and the elementary school 3 blocks away was rated among the best in Oregon. "I work at Portland Children's Hospital, but I've been considering scaling back to part-time so I could spend more time at home," James explained. "I have a nanny lined up, Mrs. Rodriguez, who's been caring for doctors' children for 15 years. She's bilingual, has early childhood education training, and her own grandchildren adore her." Sarah found herself oddly comforted by the mundane details. James wasn't just offering to take Emma. He was offering her a complete life filled with stability and opportunities Sarah could never provide on her own. "What about when she's older?" Sarah asked. "What would you tell her about her family?" James glanced at Vincent, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "I'd tell her the truth, in age-appropriate ways. That her birth mother loved her very much but couldn't care for her safely, so she made the difficult decision to find someone who could. When Emma's old enough to understand, I'd explain that her mother is working hard to build a better life so they can be together again. The answer was better than Sarah had dared hope. She'd feared Emma would grow up thinking her mother had abandoned her, but James seemed committed to preserving Sarah's role in the story. "I want to know what kind of man you really are," Sarah said suddenly. "Not the professional version, the real you." James looked surprised by the directness, but he seemed to understand the importance of her question. He sat down across from her, his posture relaxing slightly. "I read mystery novels until 2 in the morning," he said with a slight smile. "I burn pancakes every single time I try to make them, but I keep trying because I loved my mother's recipe. I talk to my patients like they're adults, even the 3-year-olds, because I think kids deserve respect." He paused, his expression growing more serious. "I cry during animated movies, not just the sad parts, but the happy endings too. I volunteer at a free clinic on weekends because I remember what it was like growing up without health insurance. And I've been lonely for so long that sometimes I have entire conversations with my reflection, just to hear another voice in the house." Sarah felt something shift inside her chest. This wasn't the polished presentation she'd expected from a successful doctor. James Harrison was showing her his vulnerabilities, his flaws, the human imperfections that somehow made him more trustworthy rather than less. "Why do you want to do this?" Sarah asked quietly. "You could adopt through official channels eventually. Why take on this complicated situation?" James looked down at his hands, considering his answer carefully. "Because official channels would take years, and they'd want to place a child with a married couple, not a single father. But mostly because I understand what it's like to have your life turned upside down by circumstances beyond your control." He looked back up at Sarah, and she saw tears threatening at the corners of his eyes. "Catherine and I had our whole future planned out. We were going to start trying for children right after her residency ended. Then she got diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian cancer, and suddenly we had 6 months instead of 60 years. The pain in his voice was unmistakable, and Sarah recognized the same desperate love she felt for Emma, reflected in his grief for his wife. "I know what it's like to make impossible choices because you love someone," James continued. "Catherine wanted to try aggressive treatment that might have given her a few more months, but the side effects would have made her miserable. I supported her decision to enter hospice care instead, even though it meant losing her sooner." Sarah realized that James understood her situation in a way that surprised her. He'd faced his own version of choosing between bad options and worse ones. Emma chose that moment to wake up, making soft mewing sounds that indicated she was getting hungry. Sarah lifted her daughter from the carrier, and Emma immediately settled against her chest, tiny fist tangling in Sarah's hair. "Would you like to hold her?" Sarah heard herself ask, the words coming out before she'd consciously decided to speak them. James's expression showed a mixture of hope and fear. "Are you sure?" Sarah nodded, though her hands trembled slightly as she prepared to hand Emma over. This felt like a test, not just of James, but of her own ability to go through with Vincent's plan. James accepted Emma with practiced ease, supporting her head naturally and settling her into the crook of his arm. The baby looked up at him with curious eyes, and James smiled down at her with such gentle wonder that Sarah felt her heart clench. "Hello, Emma," James whispered, his voice soft and musical. "Aren't you the most beautiful girl in the world?" Emma gurgled happily, apparently approving of this new person. Her tiny hand reached up and grabbed James's finger with surprising strength, and he laughed with pure delight. "She likes you," Sarah observed, fighting back unexpected tears. "She's perfect," James replied, his attention completely focused on the baby in his arms. "Look at those eyes, they're so intelligent. I bet she's going to be curious about everything." Watching James with Emma, Sarah experienced a revelation that hit her like a physical blow. For the first time since her daughter's birth, she wasn't terrified about Emma's future. The constant anxiety about money, safety, and whether she was doing enough had been her constant companion for months. But looking at James holding her daughter with such natural tenderness, Sarah felt something she'd almost forgotten: peace. "I have one more question," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was considering. "What happens if something goes wrong with Vincent's plan? What if I can't come back, or what if circumstances change?" James looked up from Emma, his expression serious again. "Then Emma stays with me permanently, and I raise her with the same love and care I'd give my biological daughter. She'd never want for anything, and she'd always know how much her birth mother loved her. And if I do come back, then we figure out how to blend our lives together in whatever way works best for Emma," James replied without hesitation. "Maybe that means I become the father figure while you're her mother. Maybe it means we co-parent as friends. Maybe it even means we become a family in the traditional sense, if that's what develops naturally over time." Sarah was struck by his flexibility, his willingness to let Emma's needs determine their future arrangements, rather than trying to control the situation. Vincent, who had remained silent during most of this exchange, finally spoke up. "We need a decision tonight," he said gently but firmly. "Every hour we delay increases the risk for everyone." Sarah looked at Emma, still contentedly nestled in James's arms. Her daughter seemed completely at ease with this stranger, as if some instinct told her she was safe. Sarah thought about all the nights she'd lain awake, worrying about Emma's future, wondering if love would be enough when she couldn't provide financial security or educational opportunities. "If I do this," Sarah said slowly, "I want regular updates. Photos, videos, reports about her health and development. I want to know about her first smile, her first word, every milestone." "Of course," James agreed immediately. "I'd want the same thing in your position." Sarah stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights of Detroit. Somewhere out there was the life she'd been trying to build for Emma: a tiny apartment, a minimum wage job, and a future limited by circumstances beyond her control. Down here in this room was an alternative that terrified her but offered Emma everything Sarah wanted to give her and more. "How do we know this will work?" Sarah asked, turning back to face Vincent and James. "How do we know Emma will be safe during the transition?" Vincent pulled out his phone and showed her a detailed timeline. "James will drive back to Portland tonight with Emma. Tomorrow morning, he'll register her birth with the Oregon Department of Health, using documentation my people have prepared. By tomorrow afternoon, Emma Harrison will officially exist, complete with medical records, birth certificate, and social security number." The efficiency of Vincent's operation was both impressive and terrifying. Sarah wondered how many other lives he'd completely restructured with the same methodical precision. "What about me?" Sarah asked. "You'll be on a flight to Vancouver tomorrow evening," Vincent replied. "By the time you land, Rebecca Walsh will have a Canadian passport, university transcripts from Nova Scotia, and enough money to start graduate school at the University of British Columbia." Sarah felt dizzy from the speed at which her entire existence was being dismantled and rebuilt. In less than 24 hours, both she and Emma would become completely different people, living entirely separate lives. "I need a moment alone with her," Sarah said quietly. James immediately stood and gently placed Emma back in Sarah's arms. "Take all the time you need," he said, then followed Vincent out of the room, alone with her daughter for what might be the last time in years. Sarah felt the full weight of her decision crushing down on her. Emma looked up at her with trusting eyes, completely unaware that her entire world was about to change. "I'm so sorry, baby girl," Sarah whispered, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "I'm sorry I couldn't be the mother you deserve. I'm sorry I got us into this mess, and I'm sorry I have to leave you to keep you safe." Emma gurgled softly, her tiny hand reaching up to touch Sarah's face as if trying to comfort her mother. "But I promise you this," Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger. "I'm going to use this time to become someone worthy of you. I'm going to build a life that can give you everything you need and want. And I'm going to come back for you, Emma. No matter what happens, no matter how long it takes, I will come back for you." Sarah kissed her daughter's forehead, breathing in the sweet baby scent she'd memorized over the past 3 months. Then, before she could lose her courage, she called for Vincent and James to return. "I'll do it," she said as they entered the room. "But I have conditions." Sarah's conditions were non-negotiable, and she delivered them with a clarity that surprised even herself. First, she wanted a direct communication channel with James that bypassed Vincent's network entirely, a way to reach Emma's caregiver without depending on criminal intermediaries. Second, she demanded the right to return immediately if Emma faced any serious health crisis or emergency. Third, James would receive a sealed letter containing Sarah's true identity and the complete story, to be opened only if something happened to Vincent or if circumstances made Sarah's return impossible. "And finally," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face, "I want 1 full day with Emma before we say goodbye. Not here in this warehouse, not surrounded by strangers planning our separation. I want 24 hours. To be her mother without anyone watching or rushing us." Vincent and James exchanged glances, but both men nodded their agreement. Vincent arranged for Sarah and Emma to stay in a safe house outside Detroit, a modest cabin on a small lake where they could have privacy. James would return to Portland to begin preparations, then come back the following evening for the final transition. The safe house was nothing like the luxury Sarah had expected from Vincent's operation. Instead, it was a simple 2-bedroom cottage with knotty pine walls and furniture that looked like it came from garage sales. But it had something Sarah's apartment in Millbrook had never offered: complete peace and quiet. Sarah spent that precious day creating memories she could carry with her through the separation ahead. She gave Emma her first real bath in the cottage's deep clawfoot tub, marveling at how her daughter kicked her tiny legs in the warm water and seemed to smile at the sensation. She sang every lullaby she could remember while Emma napped against her chest on the front porch swing. Most importantly, Sarah talked to her daughter constantly, explaining everything that was about to happen. She knew Emma couldn't understand the words, but she hoped somehow her daughter would remember her mother's voice, the cadence and tone that said "I love you" in 1,000 different ways. "You're going to live with Dr. Harrison now," Sarah explained while changing Emma's diaper, for what felt like the 1,000th time. "He's a good man, baby girl. He's going to take better care of you than I ever could. You'll have your own room with pretty decorations and toys I could never afford, and he'll read you stories every night." Emma gurgled happily, completely trusting in her mother's presence. Sarah memorized every detail: the way Emma's hair curled slightly at the nape of her neck, how her left eye closed a fraction of a second before her right when she was falling asleep, the tiny birthmark shaped like a crescent moon on her shoulder. As the day progressed, Sarah found herself having conversations with Emma about the future they wouldn't share together, at least not for a while. She described the college education she planned to pursue as Rebecca Walsh, the career she hoped to build, the woman she wanted to become so she could offer Emma a real future when they reunited. "I'm going to study education," Sarah decided aloud, while feeding Emma her evening bottle. "I want to be a teacher, maybe even a principal someday. That way, when you start school, I'll understand everything about how to help you succeed." The plan felt more real when she said it out loud. For months, Sarah had been so focused on day-to-day survival that she'd forgotten what it felt like to have goals beyond paying rent and buying formulas. Vincent's offer, terrible as the separation would be, was giving her something she'd thought was lost forever: the chance to build a meaningful life. As darkness fell over the lake, Sarah walked the shoreline with Emma bundled against the evening chill. The water lapped gently against the dock, and somewhere in the distance, A loon called to its mate. The sound was hauntingly beautiful, and Sarah found herself crying again, not just from sadness, but from a complex mixture of grief and hope. "This is what I want for you," she whispered to Emma. "Peaceful places like this, where you can feel safe and happy. Dr. Harrison will make sure you have beautiful places to explore." That night, Sarah barely slept. She lay in the cottage's small bedroom, with Emma in a borrowed crib beside her, listening to her daughter's soft breathing and trying to memorize the sound. Every few hours, she would get up to check on Emma, knowing that tomorrow night another person would be the one ensuring her daughter's safety. Sarah had written 3 letters during their day at the cottage. The first was for James, containing not just her real identity but detailed information about Emma's personality, preferences, and routines. She described how Emma liked to be held during feedings, which songs seemed to calm her when she was fussy, and how she always slept better when there was soft music playing. The second letter was for Emma herself, to be given to her when she was old enough to understand. Sarah poured her heart onto the pages, explaining why she'd made this impossible choice and how much she loved her daughter. She wrote about her dreams for Emma's future and her promise to return when she could offer the life her daughter deserved. The third letter was the hardest to write. Addressed to herself, it contained reminders of why she was doing this and what she hoped to accomplish during their separation. Sarah sealed it with instructions to Vincent that it should be delivered to her new identity in Vancouver 6 months. Later, when the initial pain of separation might make her forget her resolve, morning came too quickly, bringing with it the arrival of Vincent and James. Sarah heard their car pull up the gravel driveway and felt her chest tighten with panic. She wasn't ready. She would never be ready. James entered the cottage looking nervous but determined. He carried a large bag filled with baby supplies and what appeared to be professionally prepared documents. Sarah noticed he'd shaved and was wearing a nice shirt. He was taking this transition seriously, treating it with the gravity it deserved. "How did she sleep?" James asked, his voice gentle. "Better than I did," Sarah admitted, lifting Emma from her crib. Her daughter was in a remarkably good mood, cooing and reaching for the sunbeam streaming through the window. "I brought everything she needs for the trip to Portland," James said, unpacking his bag. "Formula, diapers, clothes in multiple sizes, toys, a car seat that's been properly installed and inspected." Sarah watched him work, noting how carefully he'd thought through every detail. This wasn't someone taking on a child impulsively. James had clearly spent considerable time preparing for Emma's arrival in his life. "I also brought this," James said, pulling out a small device that looked like a digital camera. "It's a video recorder. I thought you might want to record a message for Emma, something she can watch when she's older." The thoughtfulness of the gesture nearly broke Sarah's composure completely. She accepted the recorder with shaking hands, grateful that James understood how important it was for her to leave something of herself with Emma. Sarah spent several minutes recording messages for her daughter, some to be watched immediately, others saved for important milestones like birthdays and graduations. She sang Emma's favorite lullaby, told her favorite nursery rhyme, and recorded herself simply talking about how much she loved being Emma's mother. "I want you to know that every day we were together was the best day of my life," Sarah said into the camera, Emma sitting contentedly in her lap. "You made me braver and stronger than I ever thought I could be. You taught me what real love feels like." When the recording was finished, Sarah handed the device back to James along with the detailed letter she'd written about Emma's care. James read through it carefully, asking thoughtful questions about Emma's routines and preferences. "She's usually hungry around 10 in the morning and 3 in the afternoon," Sarah explained. "But she's pretty flexible about timing. She loves being sung to, especially anything with a strong rhythm. And she sleeps better in a room that's completely dark. She gets distracted by shadows and lights." James took notes on everything. treating Sarah's instructions like the vital information they were. Sarah appreciated that he wasn't dismissing her expertise just because she was young and hadn't been a mother for very long. Vincent, who had been quietly arranging final details, approached them with a manila envelope. "Rebecca Walsh is complete. Identity package," he said, handing it to Sarah. "Passport, university transcripts, bank account information, and enough money to get established in Vancouver." Sarah stared at the envelope, knowing it represented the end of her life as Sarah Mitchell and the beginning of something entirely unknown. The weight of it felt enormous. "There's also this," Vincent added, producing a small cell phone. "Untraceable, with one number programmed into it. That's James's direct line. No one else has access to it, and it bypasses my network completely." The phone felt warm in Sarah's palm, like a lifeline connecting her to Emma across whatever distance would separate them. Sarah immediately memorized the number, repeating it silently until it was burned into her memory. "My flight leaves Detroit at 8 tonight," Sarah said, checking the travel documents Vincent had provided. "That gives us most of the day to make the transition as easy as possible for Emma." James nodded, then hesitated before speaking. "I've been thinking about something. What if we don't make this goodbye traumatic? What if we treat it more like, I'm a new babysitter who's going to be staying for a while?" Sarah looked at him with surprise and gratitude. She'd been dreading the moment when she'd have to hand Emma over and walk away, knowing her daughter would be confused and possibly frightened by her mother's sudden disappearance. "Emma's so young that she adapts quickly to new caregivers," James continued. "If we spend the day together, letting her get comfortable with me while you're still here, the transition might be easier for everyone." It was a generous offer, and Sarah accepted it gratefully. They spent the morning playing with Emma together, with James gradually taking on more of the caregiving responsibilities, while Sarah remained close by. Emma seemed to enjoy having two adults focused entirely on her, giggling at their silly faces, and reaching for both of them with equal enthusiasm. During Emma's afternoon nap, Sarah and James sat on the cottage's front porch and talked about practical matters. James showed her photos of the nursery he'd prepared, complete with a crib, changing table, and walls painted in soft yellow with cheerful animal decorations. "I hired Mrs. Rodriguez to start next week," James explained. "She'll be there during the day while I'm at work, but I've arranged my schedule so I can be home by 4 every afternoon. Evenings and weekends will be just Emma and me." Sarah felt a pang of jealousy, imagining another woman caring for her daughter during the day, but she pushed the feeling aside. Mrs. Rodriguez was a trained professional who could provide Emma with educational activities and social interaction that would benefit her development. "What will you tell people about her?" Sarah asked. "Your colleagues, neighbors, friends?" "The truth, mostly," James replied. "That I'm adopting the daughter of a friend who died. It's close enough to the real situation that I won't have trouble keeping the story straight." As the afternoon wore on, Sarah found herself relaxing into the strange domestic scene they'd created. James was a natural with Emma, anticipating her needs and responding to her cues with impressive intuition. More importantly, Emma seemed genuinely happy in his presence, smiling and babbling in response to his gentle attention. When it came time for Sarah to leave for the airport, Emma was sleeping peacefully in James's arms. Sarah had planned to wake her daughter for one final goodbye, but something held her back. Emma looked so content, so secure in her new caregiver's embrace, that Sarah couldn't bring herself to disturb that peace. Instead, she kissed her fingertips and gently touched them to Emma's forehead, whispering a promise so quietly that only her daughter could hear it. "I love you, baby girl. I'll come back for you. I promise I'll come back." James walked Sarah to Vincent's car, still carrying the sleeping Emma. At the last moment, Sarah turned back for one final look at her daughter. Emma had shifted in her sleep, her tiny fist curled against James's chest, completely trusting in this stranger who was no longer a stranger. "Take care of her," Sarah whispered, her voice breaking on the words. "I will," James promised. "I'll love her like she's my own daughter, but I'll never let her forget that you're her mother." Sarah climbed into the car beside Vincent, her hands shaking as she fastened her seatbelt. As they drove away from the cottage, she watched through the rear window until James and Emma disappeared from view. Then she turned to face forward, toward Vancouver and the uncertain future of Rebecca Walsh. The woman who had been Sarah Mitchell was gone. The mother who had fought so hard to protect her daughter had made the ultimate sacrifice, trusting a stranger with the most precious thing in her world. Now all that remained was to become someone worthy of Emma's love when they met again, Rebecca. Walsh's first morning in Vancouver began with a panic attack that left her gasping for air on the bathroom floor of her studio apartment. The previous night had been a blur of customs officials, taxi rides, and the surreal experience of answering to a name that felt foreign on her tongue. But awakening to silence, no baby crying, no tiny fists demanding attention, brought the reality of her situation crashing down with devastating force. The apartment Vincent's people had arranged was small but comfortable, located in Vancouver's Kitsilano neighborhood near the University of British Columbia campus. Through her window, she could see mountains rising beyond the city skyline, their peaks shrouded in morning mist. It was beautiful in a way that felt almost insulting given the circumstances that had brought her here. Rebecca, she had to think of herself as Rebecca now, spent her first week in a haze of bureaucratic necessity. She enrolled at UBC as a graduate student in education, using transcripts that showed Rebecca Walsh had completed her undergraduate degree in Nova Scotia with honors. She opened a Canadian bank account, got a library card, and bought groceries with money that felt stolen despite Vincent's assurances that it was legitimately acquired. The hardest part was the complete absence of routine. For 3 months her entire life had revolved around Emma's needs, feeding schedules, diaper changes, nap times that structured every hour of every day. Now she faced vast expanses of empty time with no purpose beyond building a fictional life for a fictional person. On her 5th day in Vancouver, Rebecca received her first update from James. The package arrived by courier, containing no return address or identifying information beyond a Portland postmark. Inside were a dozen photographs of Emma and a handwritten letter that made Rebecca cry in her empty apartment. "Emma is thriving," James had written. "She's sleeping through the night now and has developed the most amazing smile. It lights up her entire face. Mrs. Rodriguez says she's exceptionally alert for her age and seems fascinated by music. I've been playing classical pieces during her afternoon playtime, and she appears to have definite preferences. Mozart makes her clap her tiny hands, but Bach puts her right to sleep." The photograph showed Emma in James's house looking healthy and content. There was one of her in a beautiful nursery with yellow walls and a mobile of dancing elephants. Another showed her in James's arms on what appeared to be a back porch, both of them laughing at something off camera. But the photo that broke Rebecca's heart was the simplest one: Emma asleep in her crib, clutching a stuffed rabbit that Rebecca had never seen before. Her daughter was building a life without her, forming attachments and preferences that Rebecca would know only through second-hand reports. The rational part of her mind understood this was exactly what she'd hoped for, but the mother's heart she carried felt each small milestone as a personal loss. Rebecca threw herself into her studies with an intensity that surprised her professors. She enrolled in summer courses despite having just arrived, taking on a full graduate course load that kept her mind occupied from dawn until well past midnight. She studied child development, educational psychology, and classroom management techniques with the dedication of someone whose future depended on mastering every concept. Dr. Patricia Chun, her faculty advisor, noticed Rebecca's unusual motivation during their first meeting in July. Most graduate students ease into the program gradually, Dr. Chun observed. You're attacking it like you're trying to complete your degree in record time. Rebecca had prepared for this question, crafting the story about wanting to honor her deceased parents' memory by succeeding academically. The lie came easier than she'd expected, though it left her feeling hollow. I want to make a difference in children's lives, Rebecca said, which was at least partially true. I've seen how much impact a good teacher can have. Dr. Chun seemed satisfied with this explanation and helped Rebecca design a program of study focused on early childhood education. Rebecca found herself genuinely interested in the coursework, particularly research on attachment theory and child development during the first 3 years of life. The second package from James arrived exactly 6 months after Rebecca's arrival in Vancouver. This one contained a DVD along with the usual photographs and letter. Rebecca's hands shook as she slid the disc into her laptop, knowing she was about to see Emma in motion for the first time since their separation. The video opened with Emma sitting in a high chair, clearly older and more alert than in the previous photos. She was wearing a yellow dress with tiny ducklings embroidered on the front, and her hair had grown long enough to curl slightly around her ears when James appeared. In the frame carrying a bowl of what looked like baby food, Emma's face erupted in the most joyful smile Rebecca had ever seen. "Say hi to Mommy," James said softly, pointing toward the camera. Emma babbled happily, clapping her hands and bouncing in her chair. "She's been practicing new sounds all week," James continued, clearly addressing Rebecca through the lens. "She said something that sounded like Mama yesterday, though Mrs. Rodriguez thinks it was just random babbling." Rebecca rewound that section 3 times, listening for any hint of recognition in Emma's voice. Her daughter was 9 months old now, walking with support and clearly thriving in James's care. But she was also becoming a different child than the infant Rebecca had known, more confident, more sociable, shaped by experiences that Rebecca could only observe from a distance. The video continued with scenes of Emma's daily routine. James feeding her breakfast while she grabbed enthusiastically at the spoon. Mrs. Rodriguez reading to her in both English and Spanish from a colorful picture book. Emma playing with blocks on the living room carpet, giggling when they toppled over. Normal happy moments that should have brought Rebecca joy but instead emphasized how completely separate their lives had become. James had included a personal message at the end of the video. "She's an incredible little girl," he said, speaking directly to the camera. "She's curious about everything, and she has this laugh that makes everyone around her smile. I think she has your determination. When she wants something, she doesn't give up until she gets it." He paused, seeming to struggle with his words. "I want you to know that I talk about you every day. I show her your picture and tell her stories about her mommy who loves her very much. I don't know if she understands yet, but I want to make sure she knows you exist." Rebecca sobbed through the rest of the message, grateful for James's thoughtfulness while simultaneously heartbroken by the necessity of it. Her daughter was growing up with a surrogate parent who clearly adored her, but Emma would never remember these early months they'd shared together. By spring of her first year in Vancouver, Rebecca had established a routine that kept her functional, if not happy. She attended classes, worked as a teaching assistant for undergraduate courses, and spent her evenings either studying or volunteering at a local community center that offered childcare for low-income families. Being around other people's children was both therapeutic and torturous, but it helped her feel connected to the profession she was preparing to enter. She had also begun seeing Dr. Amanda Foster, a therapist who specialized in helping people navigate complicated grief. Rebecca couldn't tell Dr. Foster the complete truth about her situation, but she could discuss the pain of being separated from her daughter and the guilt she felt about the choices that had led to their separation. "Grief isn't always about death," Dr. Foster explained during one of their sessions. "You're mourning the loss of your daily relationship with your daughter, the future you'd planned together, even your own identity as her primary caregiver. Those feelings are valid even if the separation was your choice. The therapy helped Rebecca understand that her constant sadness wasn't a sign of weakness or self-pity, but a natural response to an unnatural situation. She began to forgive herself for the mistakes that had led to their predicament and focus on building the skills and stability that would make their eventual reunion possible. Rebecca's academic performance earned her recognition from the faculty and several scholarship opportunities. She was invited to present her research on childhood resilience at a national conference, where her paper on children who thrive despite early trauma received significant attention from other educators. "You have an unusual insight into your subject matter," Dr. Chun commented after Rebecca's presentation. "Your writing shows a deep understanding of how children process difficult experiences. It's quite remarkable for someone so young." Rebecca accepted the praise while privately acknowledging its source. She understood childhood trauma because she was living it, studying the very theories that might explain how Emma would process their separation and eventual reunion. The third package from James arrived on Emma's first birthday, containing the most extensive collection of photos and videos yet. Emma was walking confidently now, her personality clearly emerging in every image. She had James's gentle nature, but also showed flashes of fierce determination that Rebecca recognized as her own contribution to her daughter's character. The birthday party James had organized was small but thoughtful, just Mrs. Rodriguez's family and a few neighbors with children Emma's age. Emma wore a pink dress with a matching bow in her now curly hair, and her delight at the attention was evident in every photo. She demolished her small birthday cake with enthusiasm, ending up covered in frosting and grinning at the camera. But the most meaningful part of the package was a recording James had made of Emma playing with a photo album. Page after page showed pictures of Rebecca holding infant Emma, and James's voice could be heard narrating, "That's your mommy, Emma. She loves you so much. Can you say mama?" Emma pointed at the photos with obvious recognition, babbling what sounded like attempts at words. She kissed one picture of Rebecca, leaving a small handprint on the protective plastic. Watching her daughter interact with images of their shared past, Rebecca felt a complex mixture of heartbreak and hope. James's letter with this package was more personal than previous communications. "She's definitely your daughter," he wrote. "She has your stubborn streak and your beautiful smile. But she also has something else, a confidence that I think comes from knowing she's loved unconditionally, even by someone she can't see." He went on to describe Emma's daily routine, her favorite foods, anything involving cheese, her preferred bedtime stories, anything with animals, and her growing vocabulary. "She says Dada for me, Rosa for Mrs. Rodriguez, and something. That sounds like Mama when she's looking at your pictures. I don't know if that means she remembers you, or if it's just association, but I choose to believe she knows who you are." Rebecca read that passage dozens of times, clinging to the possibility that some part of Emma still carried their early bond. She began recording video messages to send back through Vincent's network, hoping that hearing her voice might help Emma maintain some connection to their shared beginning. As Rebecca entered her second year at UBC, she realized that the woman she was becoming bore little resemblance to the desperate young mother who had fled Detroit 18 months earlier. Rebecca Walsh was confident, educated, and built a reputation as a promising researcher in child development. She had friends among her fellow graduate students, professors who respected her work, and a growing sense of purpose in her chosen field. But she was also living a completely fabricated life, maintaining relationships built on lies and achieving success under a stolen identity. The moral complexity of her situation weighed on her constantly, particularly as she prepared to enter a profession dedicated to Tican, helping children and families. The contradiction became especially acute when Rebecca was offered a prestigious internship at Vancouver Children's Hospital, working with families in crisis. The position would provide excellent experience for her future career, But it would also require her to help parents navigate situations remarkably similar to her own, albeit through legal channels and with proper support systems. Rebecca accepted the position, telling herself that her unconventional background might actually make her more effective at helping families in desperate circumstances. She understood what it felt like to make impossible choices, to love someone so much that you'd sacrifice your own happiness for their well-being. Her first case at the hospital involved a teenage mother whose boyfriend had been arrested for drug trafficking. The young woman, barely 18, was facing pressure from social services to place her 6-month-old son in foster care while she got her life together. The parallels to Rebecca's own situation were so striking that she had to excuse herself from the initial meeting to compose herself in the bathroom. "I know this seems impossible right now," Rebecca told the young mother during their second meeting. "But sometimes the hardest choices we make for our children are also the most loving ones. What matters isn't what looks normal from the outside, but what gives your son the best chance at a happy, stable life." The young mother looked at Rebecca with desperate eyes. "How can you know that? How can anyone know what's right in a situation like this?" Rebecca wanted to tell her the truth, that she'd faced an even more impossible choice and somehow found the strength to make it. Instead, she offered what support she could within the bounds of her professional role, helping the family navigate resources and options that might keep them together. Working with families in crisis made Rebecca more certain than ever that she'd made the right choice for Emma, even as it highlighted the continuing cost of that decision. Every day, she helped other parents fight to stay with their children while she remained voluntarily separated from her own daughter, but it also reinforced her determination to build a life worthy of Emma's eventual return. Rebecca Walsh might be a fiction, but the woman she was becoming, educated, stable, and dedicated to protecting children, was real. When the time came to reclaim her daughter, she would be able to offer Emma everything she'd dreamed of during those desperate early months. The phone call that changed everything came on a rainy Tuesday morning in October, 2.5 years after Rebecca had arrived in Vancouver. She was reviewing research proposals in her campus office when the untraceable phone Vincent had given her rang for the first time since she'd received it. Rebecca's heart stopped as she recognized the number, James's direct line that was supposed to be used only for emergencies. "Rebecca?" James's voice was strained, barely controlled. "Emma's in the hospital. She's stable now, but there was an accident." Rebecca's world tilted sideways. She gripped the edge of her desk, fighting off the wave of dizziness that threatened to overwhelm her. "What happened? Is she hurt badly?" "She fell down the stairs at our house," James explained, his words coming in a rush. "She was playing with her ball, chasing it toward the landing, and she tumbled. The doctors say she has a concussion and a broken arm, but no permanent damage." Rebecca closed her eyes, trying to process information that felt surreal. Emma was now 3 years old, walking and running, and apparently climbing stairs she shouldn't have been near. In her mind, Rebecca still pictured the infant she'd left behind, not the active toddler her daughter had become. "I'm coming," Rebecca said without hesitation. "I'll be on the next flight to Portland." "Wait," James said quickly. "Before you make any decisions, you need to understand something. Emma doesn't remember you. When she was injured, she was calling for me and Mrs. Rodriguez, asking for familiar faces. Seeing a stranger right now might confuse or frighten her when she needs comfort most." The words hit Rebecca like physical blows. She'd known intellectually that Emma might not remember their early months together, but hearing it confirmed in the context of her daughter's pain made the reality devastating. "She's my daughter," Rebecca whispered, her professional composure cracking completely. "I need to see her." "I know," James replied gently, "and I think you should. But let's do this carefully, for Emma's sake. Can you come to Portland quietly? We can introduce you gradually, maybe as a friend who's visiting." She's scared and hurting right now. We don't want to add confusion to her trauma. Rebecca agreed, though every maternal instinct screamed at her to rush to Emma's bedside immediately. She canceled her classes, arranged emergency coverage for her hospital shifts, and booked a flight to Portland using Rebecca Walsh's passport while her heart called out for Sarah Mitchell's daughter. The flight seemed endless. Rebecca stared out the window at clouds and tried to prepare herself for seeing Emma as a complete stranger. She'd watched her daughter grow through photographs and videos, but experiencing Emma's personality firsthand after nearly 3 years apart would be entirely different. James met her at Portland International Airport, looking exhausted and worried. He'd aged since their brief meeting at the cottage, his hair showing gray at the temples and new lines around his eyes. But when he saw Rebecca approaching, his expression showed genuine relief. "Thank you for coming," he said simply. "I wasn't sure if you'd want to, given the circumstances." "She's my daughter," Rebecca repeated, the phrase feeling both completely true and utterly abstract. "Of course I came." During the drive to Portland Children's Hospital, James filled Rebecca in on details he hadn't shared over the phone. Emma had been released the previous day but needed to return for follow-up appointments. Her arm was in a bright pink cast that she'd insisted on decorating with stickers, and while the concussion symptoms were mild, she'd been having nightmares about falling. "She's become quite the little artist," James said, attempting to lighten the mood. "She draws constantly, and she has strong opinions about colors. Pink and purple are currently acceptable, but she's completely rejected anything green." Rebecca smiled despite her anxiety, recognizing her own childhood preference for particular colors. Some traits, it seemed, transcended circumstance and environment. The hospital corridors felt familiar from her work in Vancouver, but walking through them toward her own daughter created an entirely different emotional experience. Rebecca's hands trembled as James led her toward the pediatric wing, where Emma was having her follow-up examination. "Dr. Martinez is excellent," James explained as they approached the room. "She's been Emma's pediatrician since she was 6 months old. Emma trusts her completely." Through the open doorway, Rebecca caught her first glimpse of Emma in nearly 3 years. The toddler was sitting on an examination table, swinging her legs and chattering animatedly to a woman in a white coat. Emma's hair was longer than in the most recent photos, falling in loose curls past her shoulders. She wore bright pink leggings and a purple sweater, with the promised pink cast decorated with an impressive collection of cartoon character stickers. What struck Rebecca most forcefully was Emma's confidence. This wasn't the quiet infant she'd left behind, but a vibrant, talkative child who clearly felt secure in her environment. Emma was explaining something elaborate to Dr. Martinez, using her uninjured hand to gesture emphatically while the doctor nodded with apparent seriousness. "Emma," James said gently, entering the room, "I brought someone to meet you. This is Rebecca. She's a friend of mine who wanted to make sure you were feeling better." Emma turned toward the doorway, and Rebecca found herself looking into eyes that were unmistakably her own. The shape of Emma's face had changed as she'd grown, but those bright blue eyes were identical to the ones Rebecca saw in her mirror every morning. "Hi," Emma said politely, studying Rebecca with obvious curiosity. "Are you a doctor too?" "Not the same kind as Dr. Martinez," Rebecca replied, her voice steadier than she'd expected. "I work with children, but not when they're sick. I help them learn things." Emma's face lit up with interest. "I like learning. I can write my name now, and I know all my letters. Want to see?" Without waiting for an answer, Emma began reciting the alphabet, pointing to various stickers on her cast to illustrate each letter. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and Rebecca found herself genuinely smiling for the first time since James's phone call. "That's very impressive," Rebecca said. "How did you learn so many letters?" "Daddy taught me," Emma replied matter-of-factly. "And Rosa helps me practice, and I have books with letters that sing songs." The casual way Emma referred to James as Daddy created a complex emotional response in Rebecca. She felt simultaneous gratitude that Emma had that security and grief that she wasn't the parent. Emma claimed Dr. Martinez completed Emma's examination with a positive report. The concussion symptoms were resolving normally, and the broken arm was healing well. Emma would need to wear the cast for another month, but she could resume most normal activities immediately. She's a resilient little girl, Dr. Martinez told James and Rebecca afterward. Children her age bounce back quickly from injuries like this. The main thing is watching for any changes in behavior or sleep patterns that might indicate lingering effects from the concussion. As they left the hospital, Emma slipped her uninjured hand into James's with complete trust. She chattered about everything she saw: dogs being walked, interesting cars, a plane overhead, maintaining a running commentary that revealed both her intelligence and her secure attachment to the man she considered her father. "Can Rebecca come to our house?" Emma asked suddenly. "I want to show her my room." James glanced at Rebecca, who nodded despite the emotional complexity of entering the space where her daughter had grown up without her. Emma's room was everything James had described in his letters and more. The walls were painted pale yellow with a border of dancing animals. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with picture books and beginning readers. A small table held art supplies and several of Emma's drawings, including what appeared to be a self-portrait featuring a girl with curly hair and a big smile. "This is my bed," Emma announced, patting a twin-sized bed covered with a quilt featuring alphabet blocks. "And this is Mr. Bunny. He sleeps with me every night." Rebecca recognized the stuffed rabbit from the photographs James had sent, now clearly well-loved and slightly shabby from constant companionship. "Mr. Bunny looks very special," Rebecca said, sitting on the edge of the bed when Emma patted the space beside her. "Daddy gave him to me when I was little," Emma explained. "Before I could talk, Mr. Bunny helps me not be scared of bad dreams." Emma's matter-of-fact acceptance of her childhood included no memory of a time before James. Rebecca realized that in Emma's mind, her life had always been exactly as it was now, stable, loving, and centered around the man who had raised her. "Since infancy, what's your favorite thing to do?" Rebecca asked, genuinely curious about the person her daughter had become. Emma considered this question seriously. "I like drawing pictures and reading books and helping Rosa make cookies. And I like when Daddy tells me stories about when I was a baby." "What kind of stories?" "About how I used to cry a lot and how I learned to walk and how I said my first word," Emma replied. "Daddy says I was very small but very brave." Rebecca felt tears threatening and excused herself to use the bathroom. Standing in the hallway outside Emma's room, she could hear her daughter continuing to chatter to James about their visitor, clearly delighted to have someone new to entertain. James found Rebecca in the kitchen a few minutes later, staring out the window at the backyard where Emma was now playing on a swing set that hadn't existed in any of the photographs he'd sent. "She's wonderful," Rebecca said quietly. "You've done an incredible job raising her." "She makes it easy," James replied. "She's naturally curious and affectionate." The terrible twos weren't really terrible with Emma, more like the spirited twos. They watched through the window as Emma pushed her stuffed rabbit on a smaller swing, carefully adjusting his position with her uninjured hand while keeping up a steady conversation with her toy. "Does she ever ask about her birth mother?" Rebecca asked, not sure she wanted to hear the answer. James nodded slowly. "She started asking more questions lately. I've told her that her first mommy loved her very much but couldn't take care of her, so she asked me to be Emma's daddy instead." Emma seemed satisfied with that explanation for now, but I know the questions will get more complex as she gets older. Rebecca appreciated that James had laid groundwork for more detailed explanations when Emma was ready to hear them. He'd protected her daughter's emotional security while leaving room for truth to emerge gradually. "I've been thinking about something," James continued. Emma's going to start preschool next month. She's excited about it, but she's also a little nervous about being around so many new people. What if we introduced you as someone who works with children? Maybe someone who could visit occasionally to help her practice letters and numbers. The suggestion offered Rebecca a way to be part of Emma's life without disrupting her sense of family stability. It would allow them to build a relationship naturally, giving Emma time to become comfortable with Rebecca's presence. Would that work with your original plan? Rebecca asked. Vincent talked about eventually reuniting us, but this seems more gradual. Plans change, James said simply. What matters is what's best for Emma. If she can have both of us in her life, even if not in the traditional way, maybe that's better than any plan we made when she was an infant. Rebecca found herself considering possibilities she'd never imagined. She'd spent 3 years preparing to reclaim her role as Emma's mother, but watching her daughter's obvious happiness and security with James made her question whether disrupting that bond would truly be in Emma's best interest. What are you thinking? James asked, noticing her silence. I'm thinking that Emma is lucky to have you, Rebecca replied honestly. And I'm wondering if the best gift I can give her is to let her keep the life you've built together while finding a way to be part of it. That afternoon, Rebecca returned to Emma's room and asked if she could see more of her drawings. Emma proudly displayed her artwork, explaining each picture in detail. There were drawings of James, Mrs. Rodriguez, various pets she'd encountered, and elaborate fantasy creatures that existed only in her imagination. This one is my family, Emma said, holding up a drawing that showed a tall figure and a small figure holding hands. That's Daddy and that's me. Rebecca studied the picture, noting the obvious love and security it represented. Emma's world was complete and happy exactly as it was. It's a beautiful family, Rebecca said, meaning every word as evening approached. Rebecca knew she had to make a decision about returning to Vancouver. The emergency that had brought her to Portland was resolved. Emma was healthy and healing well. But the bigger question remained: what role should she play in her daughter's life going forward? I want to keep visiting, Rebecca told James as Emma played nearby. Not as her mother. She has a complete family with you. But as someone who cares about her, someone who can be part of her life without changing what she already has. James looked relieved. I was hoping you'd say that. Emma likes you. She's been asking if you'll come back to see her room again. Rebecca realized that this outcome, while completely different from what she'd originally planned, might be the best possible resolution for everyone involved. Emma would grow up with the stability and love James provided, while also having Rebecca's presence as a supporting figure. Rebecca could be part of her daughter's life, without disrupting the emotional security that was clearly Emma's foundation. That it wasn't the reunion Rebecca had imagined during 3 years of separation, but it was something potentially more valuable. A gradual integration that put Emma's well-being above everyone else's desires or expectations. Rebecca's new arrangement with James began slowly, with monthly visits to Portland that gradually increased to every other weekend. She returned to Vancouver with a completely transformed perspective on her situation, focusing her remaining graduate work on research about blended family structures and non-traditional parenting arrangements. Her thesis advisor, Dr. Chun, was impressed by Rebecca's nuanced understanding of complex family dynamics. Your research on alternative family formations is groundbreaking, Dr. Chun said during one of their meetings. You seem to have an intuitive grasp of how children adapt to unconventional living situations. Have you considered pursuing doctoral work in this area? Rebecca had indeed been considering exactly that, though she couldn't explain that her insights came from living the very situation she was studying. Her academic work had become a way of understanding and legitimizing the unusual family structure she, James, and Emma were creating together. Emma's 4th birthday party in February marked a significant milestone in their evolving relationship. Rebecca had been visiting regularly for 4 months, and Emma now greeted her with genuine excitement. More importantly, Emma had begun asking Rebecca to help with specific activities, reading bedtime stories, helping with art projects, teaching her new songs. "Rebecca, will you help me make a birthday cake for Mr. Bunny?" Emma asked during one visit, referring to her beloved stuffed rabbit. "His birthday is tomorrow, and Daddy doesn't know how to make tiny cakes." James laughed from across the kitchen. "I think Mr. Bunny would be honored to have Rebecca help with his birthday celebration." They spent the afternoon creating elaborate, miniature cakes from Play-Doh, complete with candles made from toothpicks and tissue paper. Emma's concentration was absolute as she worked, her tongue poking out slightly in the same gesture of focus that Rebecca remembered making as a child. "Mr. Bunny is very lucky to have such a thoughtful friend," Rebecca said as Emma arranged the Play-Doh cakes on a tiny plate. "He's not just my friend," Emma corrected seriously. "He's family. Family takes care of each other." The simple statement revealed how naturally Emma had expanded her definition of family to include Rebecca. To Emma, family wasn't defined by blood relationships or legal documents, but by the presence of people who cared about each other consistently over time. Rebecca's integration into Emma's life accelerated when Emma started preschool at Laurelhurst Academy in September. Emma loved school but sometimes struggled with the transition from her quiet home environment to the bustling classroom. James mentioned this during one of their regular phone conversations, noting that Emma often came home overwhelmed and cranky. "What if I picked her up from school occasionally?" Rebecca suggested. "I could take her somewhere quiet for an hour before bringing her home. Maybe that would help her decompress from the social stimulation." James agreed to try the arrangement, and Rebecca began picking Emma up every Wednesday afternoon. They developed a routine of going to nearby Laurelhurst Park, where Emma could climb on playground equipment or feed ducks while processing her school day. These one-on-one hours became precious to both of them, offering Emma individual attention and giving Rebecca insight into her daughter's developing personality. "Molly Peterson said her mommy is prettier than all the other mommies," Emma announced during one of their park visits, swinging her legs from a picnic table. "But I said that's not true because my daddy is the most handsome daddy and Rebecca is the prettiest grown-up lady." Rebecca felt her heart skip at being included in Emma's catalog of important people. What did Molly say to that? She said Rebecca can't count because she's not my mommy, Emma replied matter-of-factly. "But I told her that families can look different ways. Some kids have mommies and daddies, some kids have just mommies or just daddies, and some kids have daddies and special ladies who help take care of them." Emma's sophisticated understanding of family diversity impressed Rebecca. James had clearly done thoughtful work helping Emma process different family structures without making her feel that her situation was abnormal or lacking. "What do you think about that?" Rebecca asked carefully. Emma considered the question seriously, picking at the bark of the picnic table. "I think Molly doesn't know very much about families. I have Daddy and you and Rosa, and that's more people to love me than lots of kids have." Rebecca realized that Emma felt fortunate rather than deprived, viewing her unconventional family as an abundance of care rather than an absence of traditional structure. The holidays brought new challenges and opportunities for their blended arrangement. Rebecca spent Thanksgiving with James and Emma, helping to cook dinner and experiencing her first holiday with her daughter in 4 years. Emma insisted that Rebecca help her make place cards for everyone, including Mr. Bunny and Rosa's husband Miguel, who joined them for the meal. "Rebecca, you sit next to me," Emma declared, arranging the place cards with executive authority. "Daddy sits on my other side, and Mr. Bunny sits across from me so I can make sure he eats his vegetables." The dinner table conversation revealed how completely Emma had integrated Rebecca into her understanding of family. She referred to "when Rebecca taught me to make paper flowers" and the song Rebecca sings in the car. with the same casual familiarity she used for activities with James. During Emma's bath that evening, she asked Rebecca to help wash her hair, a request that felt monumentally significant. Hair washing required trust and intimacy, and Emma's comfort with Rebecca performing this parental task showed how naturally their relationship had evolved. "Rebecca," Emma said as Rebecca worked shampoo through her curls, "are you going to live with us someday?" The question caught Rebecca off guard, though she realized she should have anticipated it. Emma was now old enough to wonder about the permanence of relationships and to want the people she cared about to be consistently present. "Would you like me to live here?" Rebecca asked carefully. Emma nodded enthusiastically. "Then you could read me stories every night and help me get dressed in the morning and make pancakes on weekends like other mommies do." Rebecca felt her chest tighten with emotion. Emma was essentially asking her to step into a maternal role, but within the context of the family structure James had created. She wasn't asking Rebecca to replace James or to change their existing dynamic, but to expand it. "That sounds lovely," Rebecca said honestly. "Let's see what Daddy thinks about that idea." Later that evening, after Emma was asleep, Rebecca and James had the conversation that had been building for months. They sat in James's living room with coffee, the comfortable domestic scene feeling both natural and surreal. "She asked me about living here," Rebecca said without preamble. James nodded. "She's been asking me the same thing. She wants to know why you have to leave if you're part of our family." "What do you think?" Rebecca asked, genuinely uncertain about her own feelings. The life she'd built in Vancouver was meaningful and important, but it was also constructed around the assumption that she would eventually return to claim her role as Emma's mother. Now that future looked completely different. "I think Emma is right that families can look different ways," James said slowly. "I've been wondering if maybe our family could look like two adults who care about the same child, living in the same house and sharing the work of raising her." The suggestion was practical rather than romantic, but it offered something Rebecca had never dared hope for, the chance to be Emma's daily parent alongside the man who had given her daughter stability and love. What would that look like practically? Rebecca asked. James had clearly been thinking about this extensively. "You could finish your graduate program here at Portland State instead of UBC. There are excellent education programs, and your research on alternative family structures would be valued. We could convert my home office into a bedroom for you, or if you prefer more independence, the house next door is going up for sale." Rebecca was surprised by how thoroughly James had considered the logistics. "You've really thought this through." "Emma's happiness has become the center of my life," James said simply. "And she's clearly happiest when you're here. She lights up differently when you're around, not because she loves me less, but because she has more people to love." They talked until nearly midnight, working through practical considerations and potential complications. The arrangement would require careful boundaries and clear communication, but both of them were committed to putting Emma's well-being above their own comfort or convenience. "There's something else we should discuss," Rebecca said as they prepared to end the conversation. "Eventually, Emma's going to want to know the truth about her birth family. How do we handle that conversation?" James had been dreading this topic, but knew it was inevitable. "I think we tell her the truth in age-appropriate stages. When she's ready to understand complex situations, we explain that her birth mother loved her so much that she made a difficult choice to ensure Emma's safety and happiness. And if she wants to know details about why that choice was necessary, then we tell her that sometimes adults make mistakes that put children at risk, and that the bravest thing a parent can do is recognize when someone else can provide better care," James replied. "We frame it as an act of love rather than abandonment." Rebecca felt grateful for James's thoughtful approach to these difficult conversations. He understood that Emma would need to process her origin story gradually, and he was committed to presenting it in ways that protected her emotional security while acknowledging the complexity of their situation. The decision to relocate to Portland required Rebecca to navigate several practical challenges. She needed to transfer her graduate program, establish residency in Oregon, and create a plausible explanation for her move that wouldn't raise questions about her identity. Vincent's network proved helpful one final time, providing documentation that supported Rebecca's cover story about family connections in the Pacific Northwest. Dr. Chun was disappointed to lose such a promising graduate student, but supportive of Rebecca's decision to pursue opportunities closer to family. Your work on alternative family structures would be welcomed at Portland State, she assured Rebecca. Dr. Williams runs an excellent program there, and your research would complement his ongoing studies. The transition took 3 months to arrange properly. Rebecca spent Christmas and New Year's with James and Emma, essentially living in their house while maintaining her apartment in Vancouver as a backup plan. Emma was thrilled by the extended visit, treating it like an adventure rather than a permanent change. "Are you really going to live with us forever?" Emma asked on New Year's Eve as they made popcorn to eat while watching a children's movie. "If that's what you want," Rebecca replied, "and if Daddy agrees, then yes." Emma threw her arms around Rebecca's waist in an enthusiastic hug. "I want that more than anything. Then I'll have everything. Daddy and you and Rosa and Mr. Bunny and my own room and stories every night." Rebecca realized that Emma's list of everything didn't include things she couldn't have, but celebrated the abundance of what she did possess. Her daughter had learned to find joy in the family structure they'd created, rather than mourning the traditional family she'd never known. On Valentine's Day, Rebecca officially moved to Portland, settling into James's converted home office while they looked for a larger house that could accommodate their unconventional family arrangement. Emma helped Rebecca unpack, carefully arranging Rebecca's books on the shelves and insisting that Mr. Bunny approve of Rebecca's sleeping arrangements. "Mr. Bunny says this room needs more pink," Emma announced after conducting a serious consultation with her stuffed rabbit. "Pink makes everything more cozy." Rebecca agreed to let Emma help choose new curtains and a bedspread, cementing Emma's sense of ownership over Rebecca's presence in their home. The room became a perfect metaphor for their relationship, not quite parental, not quite guest, but something entirely new that worked for all of them. As winter turned to spring, their daily routines evolved into something remarkably functional. James continued his work at the hospital while Rebecca completed her graduate program online and began substitute teaching at local elementary schools. They shared household responsibilities naturally, with Rebecca taking over morning routines while James handled bedtime. Each playing to their strengths and preferences, Emma adapted to the new arrangement with remarkable ease, seeming to thrive under the consistent attention of 2 adults who were completely devoted to her well-being. Her preschool teachers noted her confidence and emotional maturity, commenting that Emma seemed unusually secure and happy compared to many children her age. The first major test of their unconventional family came when Emma turned 5 and started asking more sophisticated questions about her origins. She had begun kindergarten at Laurelhurst Elementary, where other children talked about their families in ways that made Emma increasingly aware of how different her situation was from her classmates. "Maya has a mommy and a daddy who live together and are married," Emma announced during dinner one evening in September. "And Tyler has 2 daddies who are married to each other. But I have a daddy and Rebecca, and you're not married to anybody." James and Rebecca exchanged glances across the dinner table. They'd prepared for this conversation, but hadn't expected it quite so soon. "That's right," James said carefully. "Families come in lots of different arrangements. What matters isn't how the grown-ups are connected to each other, but how much everyone loves and takes care of each other." Emma considered this seriously while chasing peas around her plate. "But why don't you and Rebecca get married? Then we'd be like Maya's family." Rebecca felt her cheeks flush. The question was logical from a 5-year-old's perspective, but it highlighted the complexity of their relationship. They lived together, shared parenting responsibilities, and had become deeply important to each other, but their bond was built around Emma rather than romantic attachment. Marriage is something that happens when two grown-ups fall in love with each other in a special way, Rebecca explained. Daddy and I love each other as friends and family, but it's a different kind of love than what married people have. But you could learn to love each other the married way, Emma suggested with 5-year-old logic. You already live together and take care of me together. You just need to practice the kissing part. James nearly choked on his water, and Rebecca had to suppress a laugh at Emma's pragmatic approach to romance. Their daughter had clearly been giving their relationship considerable thought. It doesn't work that way, sweetheart, James said gently. But the important thing is that we're both committed to being your family forever, whether we're married or not. Emma seemed satisfied with this explanation for the moment, but Rebecca knew the questions would become more complex as Emma got older and began understanding the nuances of adult relationships. The following month brought a challenge none of them had anticipated. Emma came home from school, upset because another child had told her that families without real mommies were broken. Emma had defended her family structure fiercely, but the encounter left her questioning things she'd previously taken for granted. Am I broken because I don't have a real mommy? Emma asked Rebecca that evening while they worked on a puzzle together. Rebecca's heart broke at the question. She knelt down to Emma's eye level, choosing her words carefully. You are absolutely not broken, Rebecca said firmly. You are perfect exactly as you are. And you do have people who love you like mommies love their children. You just have a different kind of family than some other kids. But what if I want a real mommy like other kids have? Rebecca took a deep breath, knowing this was the moment she'd been preparing for since returning to Portland. What if I told you that you do have a real mommy? What if your real mommy loved you so much that she wanted to make sure you had the very best life possible? Emma's eyes widened with interest. Where is she? She's closer than you think, Rebecca said softly. Your real mommy has been taking care of you and loving you this whole time, just not in the way that most mommies do. Emma studied Rebecca's face intently, and Rebecca could see her daughter's sharp mind working through the implications. At 5, Emma was old enough to understand more than Rebecca had given her credit for. Are you my real mommy? Emma asked. Quietly, Rebecca felt tears spring to her eyes. Yes, sweetheart, I'm your real mommy. But I couldn't take care of you when you were a baby, so I asked Daddy James to help me keep you safe and happy. Emma was quiet for a long moment, processing this revelation. Why couldn't you take care of me? Sometimes grown-ups get into situations that aren't safe for babies, Rebecca explained, using the age-appropriate language she and James had discussed. I wanted to make sure you grew up in a place where you'd always be protected and loved. So I asked the best daddy in the world to take care of you until I could be the kind of mommy you deserved. And now you can be that kind of mommy? Yes, Rebecca said, her voice thick with emotion. Now I can be your real mommy and live with you and Daddy James, and we can all take care of each other. Emma launched herself into Rebecca's arms, hugging her tightly. I knew it, she said against Rebecca's shoulder. I knew you were my real mommy. You smell like home. Rebecca held her daughter close, marveling at Emma's intuitive understanding of their connection. Despite having no conscious memory of their early months together, Emma had somehow recognized the bond between them. When James came home from work that evening, Emma ran to him with explosive excitement. Daddy, Rebecca told me she's my real mommy. Did you know she was my real mommy this whole time? James looked surprised but pleased. She told you? That's wonderful, Emma. How do you feel about it? I feel happy, Emma said simply. Now I have a real mommy and a real daddy, and I don't have to explain to kids at school why my family looks different. Over the following weeks, Emma peppered Rebecca with questions about their shared past. Rebecca answered honestly but carefully, focusing on the love that had motivated her decisions rather than the dangerous circumstances that had made them necessary. "Were you sad when you couldn't take care of me?" Emma asked during one of their bedtime conversations. "I was very sad," Rebecca admitted. "It was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. But I was also happy because I knew Daddy James would love you and keep you safe. Are you still sad?" "No, sweetheart. Now I'm the happiest I've ever been because I get to be your mommy and watch you grow up into such an amazing little girl." Emma seemed satisfied with these explanations, and her behavior showed no signs of distress from learning the truth. If anything, she seemed more confident and secure, as if finally understanding her origin story had answered questions she hadn't known she was asking. The revelation also shifted the dynamics between Rebecca and James. With the truth out in the open, they could be more authentic about their roles and relationships. Emma began calling Rebecca Mommy naturally, while continuing to call James Daddy. Their family finally had clear labels that matched their emotional reality. "It feels good to hear her call you Mommy," James told Rebecca one evening after Emma had gone to bed. "I always felt like we were hiding something important from her. I was worried she'd feel confused or betrayed," Rebecca admitted. "But she seems to have accepted it completely." "Children are remarkably adaptable when they feel secure in their relationships," James observed. Emma never doubted that she was loved, so learning the specifics of how she came to be loved didn't threaten her sense of stability. As winter approached, their family faced its first holiday season with all the cards on the table. Emma was excited to introduce Rebecca as her real mommy to extended family members, including James's parents who were flying in from Seattle for Thanksgiving. Rebecca was nervous about meeting James's parents, knowing they might have complicated feelings about the unconventional arrangement. But Emma's enthusiasm smoothed the introduction considerably. "Grandma Joan and Grandpa Bill, this is my real mommy," Emma announced proudly when James's parents arrived. "Her name is Rebecca, and she makes the best pancakes and she knows all the best songs for car rides." Joan and Bill Harrison were gracious and welcoming, though Rebecca could see them struggling to understand the situation. Over dinner, Emma cheerfully explained the arrangement with 5-year-old directness. "Mommy Rebecca couldn't take care of me when I was little because grown-up things were complicated," Emma said between bites of turkey. "So she asked Daddy James to be my daddy until she could be my mommy again. Now they both take care of me together, and I have more family than anybody else in my class." Joan Harrison smiled at her granddaughter's confidence. "That sounds like a very special arrangement, Emma. You're lucky to have so many people who love you." "I know," Emma replied matter-of-factly. "I have the best family ever." Later that evening, when Emma was playing with her cousins, Joan approached Rebecca privately. "I want to thank you for the choice you made," she said quietly. "James told us a little about the circumstances. It must have been incredibly difficult to trust your daughter to someone you barely knew." "It was the hardest thing I've ever done," Rebecca replied honestly. "But James gave Emma everything I couldn't provide at the time. He's an amazing father. And you've given James something he thought he'd lost forever, the chance to be a parent," Joan continued. "After Catherine died, we worried he'd never allow himself to love anyone again. Emma brought him back to life, and having you here has made him happier than we've seen him in years." Rebecca was touched by Joan's perspective on their situation. She'd been so focused on her own and Emma's experiences that she hadn't fully considered how their arrangement had affected James's healing process. Christmas brought new traditions, as they celebrated as an officially acknowledged family unit. Emma insisted on making ornaments that represented their family structure, one for Daddy James, one for Mommy Rebecca, one for herself, and even one for Mr. Bunny, who remained a crucial family member despite Emma's growing sophistication. "We need to take a picture for my family tree project at school," Emma announced on Christmas morning. Mrs. Patterson said we have to show all the important people in our families. They posed together in front of their Christmas tree, and Rebecca was struck by how natural they looked as a family unit. Emma stood between them, beaming at the camera, while James and Rebecca flanked her with their hands on her shoulders. To anyone looking at the photo, they appeared to be a conventional nuclear family. "Perfect," Emma declared after reviewing the digital image. "Now everyone at school will see that I have a complete family just like theirs." The new year brought discussions about making their living arrangement more permanent. They'd been functioning as a family for nearly a year, but their housing situation remained temporary. James's house worked adequately, but it wasn't designed for their specific needs and dynamics. "What would you think about finding a place that belongs to all of us?" James asked Rebecca during one of their evening conversations. "Emma keeps talking about wanting a bigger yard for a garden, and I think it might be good for all of us to start fresh in a space we choose together." Rebecca was intrigued by the idea. The house they currently shared held memories of James's life with Catherine, and while she felt welcome there, it would be meaningful to create a home that reflected their unique family structure from the beginning. "Emma would love to have input on choosing a house," Rebecca said. "She has very strong opinions about what makes a perfect home." They began house hunting as a family, with Emma serving as an enthusiastic consultant on important features like window placement for optimal natural light in her future bedroom and backyard, specifications for both a swing set and vegetable garden. "This house has good vibes," Emma announced during their third viewing, spinning in circles in the empty living room of a craftsman-style home in the Irvington neighborhood. "I can feel that happy families live here." The house Emma had chosen was perfect for their needs: 4 bedrooms, a large kitchen suitable for family cooking projects, and a backyard with mature fruit trees and space for both a garden and play equipment. More importantly, it felt like a fresh start for all of them. "Are we really going to buy this house together?" Emma asked as they sat in the empty living room, imagining furniture arrangements. "If that's what you want," James replied. "This would be our house, all 3 of us together." "I want that more than anything," Emma said solemnly. "I want us to live together forever and ever, and I want to plant tomatoes in the backyard and have birthday parties in the big kitchen." Rebecca felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of the commitment they were considering. Buying a house together would cement their relationship in ways that went far beyond their shared responsibility for Emma. They would be making a legal and financial commitment to their unconventional family structure. "Are you sure about this?" Rebecca asked James quietly while Emma explored the house's nooks and crannies. "I've never been more sure of anything," James replied. "This isn't just about providing Emma with stability anymore. You've become family to me too, Rebecca. I can't imagine our lives without you in them." Rebecca realized she felt the same way. Over the past 2 years, James had become far more than Emma's caretaker or her co-parent. He'd become her closest friend, her partner in creating the best possible life for their daughter, and someone she trusted completely with her most precious relationships. "Then let's do it," Rebecca said. "Let's buy this house and make it our home." Emma's squeal of delight from the next room suggested she'd been eavesdropping and approved of their decision. Their unconventional family was about to take another step toward permanence, creating a foundation that could support whatever challenges and joys lay ahead. 3 years later, Emma's 8th birthday party in their Irvington home buzzed with the laughter of classmates playing in the backyard garden she'd helped design. Rebecca watched from the kitchen window as Emma led a group of children on a tour of her tomato plants, explaining with scientific precision how photosynthesis worked. James stood nearby, ready with band-aids and encouragement, his role as the steady, reliable parent unchanged despite all their family's evolution. "She's incredible," said Dr. Martinez, Emma's longtime pediatrician who had become a family friend. I've never seen a child so confident in her own identity and place in the world. Rebecca smiled, remembering the terrified young mother who had once sat in Vincent Torelli's office, certain that any choice she made would destroy her daughter's future. Emma had not only survived their unconventional beginning, but thrived beyond. Rebecca's wildest hopes to the party guests included families with every conceivable structure: single parents, blended families, adoptive families, and traditional nuclear families. Emma moved among them all with equal comfort, having learned early that love mattered more than labels. She introduced Rebecca and James without explanation, secure in the knowledge that their family needed no justification beyond its obvious. Happiness. Later that evening, after the guests had gone home and Emma had fallen asleep surrounded by new birthday treasures, Rebecca and James sat on their back porch swing, a housewarming gift Emma had specifically requested when they moved in. "Do you ever think about Vincent?" James asked quietly, watching fireflies dance among Emma's sunflowers. Rebecca nodded. "Sometimes. He saved us all, in his way. I hope he found some peace." They'd lost contact with Vincent completely after Rebecca's move to Portland. It was safer that way, and their family no longer needed the elaborate protections his network had provided. But Rebecca sometimes wondered if the dangerous man who had orchestrated their reunion ever knew how beautifully his plan had worked out. "I got a call from Portland State today," Rebecca said, changing the subject to news she'd been saving for the right moment. "They want to offer me a full professorship in their education department. I'd be heading up a new research initiative on alternative family structures and child resilience." James turned to look at her with genuine excitement. "Rebecca, that's incredible. You've only been teaching there for 2 years." "My research on unconventional families has attracted national attention," Rebecca explained, still amazed by her professional success. "Apparently, first-hand insight into complex family dynamics is rare in academic circles." The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Rebecca's stolen identity had led to genuine expertise in exactly the field she needed to understand her own situation. Her academic work legitimized and celebrated the very family structure that had once seemed impossible to explain. "What did you tell them?" "That I needed to discuss it with my family first," Rebecca replied, reaching for James's hand. "This position would mean more travel, more research responsibilities. I wanted to make sure you and Emma were comfortable with that." James squeezed her hand gently. "Emma would be proud of you. And I'd be honored to support your career the way you've supported mine all these years." Their partnership had evolved into something neither of them had expected when Vincent first proposed his desperate plan. What began as a temporary arrangement to protect Emma had become a deep friendship built on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine affection. They weren't romantic partners, but they were life partners in every way that mattered. "There's something else," Rebecca continued. "The position comes with opportunities to publish about our family story, obviously with names changed and details altered for privacy. But I could help other families understand that unconventional doesn't mean unstable." The idea of sharing their experience publicly felt both exciting and terrifying. Their story could offer hope to other families facing impossible choices, but it would also mean acknowledging the complicated circumstances that had brought them together. Emma's voice interrupted their conversation as she appeared in the doorway, wearing pajamas decorated with smiling vegetables, a gift from her garden-obsessed phase. "I couldn't sleep," she announced, climbing onto the swing between them. "I keep thinking about how perfect today was." "What made it so perfect?" Rebecca asked, wrapping her arm around Emma's shoulders. "Everything," Emma said seriously. "My friends love our house and our garden, and everyone thinks you and Daddy are the coolest parents ever. Plus, Maya's mom asked if you could help her family because her parents are getting divorced, and she thinks you're really smart about different kinds of families." Rebecca felt her heart swell with pride. Emma had inherited not just her determination, but also her compassion, naturally wanting to help other children navigate family transitions. Would you be okay if Mommy's job meant she had to travel sometimes to help other families? James asked gently. Emma considered this question with the seriousness she brought to all family decisions. Would you always come back? Always, Rebecca promised. This is my home and you're my family. Nothing would ever change that. Then I think you should help other families, Emma decided. Because everyone deserves to be as happy as we are. Later, after tucking Emma back into bed, Rebecca stood in the doorway of her daughter's room, marveling at how far they'd all come. Emma's walls were covered with her artwork, photos of family adventures, and certificates from school achievements. Mr. Bunny still occupied a place of honor on her pillow, though he now shared space with newer stuffed animals and chapter books. Sweet dreams, my brave girl, Rebecca whispered. The same words she'd spoken to infant Emma in that cottage by the lake 8 years ago. Love you, Mommy, Emma murmured sleepily. Thank you for coming back to me. Rebecca felt tears spring to her eyes. Emma remembered nothing of their separation, but somehow she understood that Rebecca's presence in her life was a gift that should never be taken for granted. Walking back to the living room, Rebecca found James reading on the couch, looking perfectly content in their comfortable home. The man who had agreed to care for a stranger's baby had become the anchor of their unconventional family, providing stability and love that had allowed both Rebecca and Emma to flourish. James, Rebecca said softly, settling beside him. Thank you. For what? For saving us. For giving Emma the childhood she deserved. For becoming the family I never knew we needed. James smiled, closing his book and pulling Rebecca into a gentle hug. Thank you for trusting me with the most important thing in your world. And for teaching me that love multiplies instead of dividing when you share it. Outside, the city of Portland hummed with the quiet energy of a summer evening. Inside their home, 3 people who had found each other through the most unlikely circumstances settled into the peaceful routine of a family secure in its bonds. Emma's artwork on the refrigerator included a new drawing from that afternoon. A house with 3 figures standing in front of a garden, all of them smiling under a bright yellow sun. At the bottom, in Emma's careful 8-year-old handwriting, she had written, "My perfect family." Rebecca thought about the young mother who had once begged a dangerous stranger to take her baby instead of her life. That woman could never have imagined that her desperate choice would lead to this. A daughter who felt completely loved and secure, a co-parent who had become family, and a life built on the foundation of an impossible decision that had somehow turned out perfectly. Sometimes the greatest acts of love require letting go. Sometimes strangers become family. And sometimes the families we choose prove stronger than the families we're born into. In the end, Sarah Mitchell had indeed saved her daughter, not by holding on, but by having the courage to let go at exactly the right moment, trusting that love would find a way to bring them back together when the time was right. Emma Harrison Walsh, as she had chosen to hyphenate her name on her 8th birthday, was living proof that children can thrive in any family structure built on love, commitment, and the unwavering belief that every child deserves to be cherished. Their story had begun with a desperate plea in a Detroit warehouse. It had become a testament to the healing power of unconventional love and the families we create when traditional structures fail us. And it was far from over. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.